All right, looks like maybe we have enough folks on now. So we will go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. As always, really appreciate everyone's time and expertise and engagement. This process does not succeed without it. So we will go ahead and get started here. Krista, do you mind doing a roll call?
Okay. Caroline Traub.
Here.
Nancy Bernard.
Here.
Valerie Graber.
Here.
Tom Jensen. Jonathan Jones.
Here.
Megan Kramer. Chris McCarthy. Mark Rabel. Andrea Smith.
Here.
Brandon Stock.
I'm here.
Jeff Urich. Okay, we just squeaked by with a quorum.
All right, hopefully some other folks will jump on here. Would anyone from the public like to introduce themselves?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Terry Beals representing Sound Transit, just observing today.
Thanks, Terry. Welcome.
Hi, this is Kevin Dewell with Northwest Natural.
Hi, Kevin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mark Vossler with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. I was also wondering, curious about the timing. I have another meeting at 11 and didn't know how far along the agenda we expected. I hope we can get to the rangewood ventilation stuff in a timely way. It's just a plea. Sorry, it's my first time attending with you guys.
Yeah, no worries. Next up is to review and approve the agenda. So somebody could help you out there and see if your topics could be moved up in the meeting order there. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves?
This is Kevin Johnson with Holiday Parks. I'm here just, I think I've got an item at the very end of the list.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Mhm.
Welcome.
Carolyn. I don't mind trying to amend the agenda, but I don't know how to do it.
Okay, sure.
I see his items down there. What do you want me to move them?
Yeah, just one second. Does anyone else from the public want to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm Austin Bonas. I'm a mechanical engineer at Rushing. I had a couple things come through last week or the week before, so finally back on to discuss them.
Great, thanks, Austin. Welcome.
I'm Kim Barker with King County Permitting, just observing today.
Welcome, Kim. All right.
Eric was going to join us.
Yeah, I was just in a meeting with him. He's hopping on. He will be on in a second.
I don't want to adjust the agenda and then mess up something else necessarily.
Yeah, Eric Vandermeer is here also. Yeah, I'm here.
Thanks, Eric. Welcome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to item 2, which is to review and approve the agenda. I think we heard from Mark that maybe it would be helpful to move up his agenda items. And we also heard from Kevin that his proposal that was tabled from last week, maybe so he could get moved up as well to help out those folks in their scheduling. So if someone would like to do that, it would just be a motion to move those items up in the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Nancy. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Sounds good.
Thanks, Brandon. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. All right. Okay. We now have an approved agenda. So next up is to review and approve the meeting minutes from last week's May 12th tag meeting. So these minutes were posted with all the materials for today. So hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at those. Would anyone like to make a motion to amend or approve the meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thanks, Jonathan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Nancy. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay. So now on to the main event. Last week, I went through where we were at in the overall code development cycle, so I won't do that again today. But in terms of the proposals and our progress, just a quick recap. So we received a total of 17 proposals for the IMC, the IFGC, and the mechanical sections of the IRC. And last week, we discussed 8 of those 17 proposals. We moved forward 4 of them, and we tabled 4 of them. So today, we're going to discuss the remaining 9 proposals, which are mostly all about ventilation in one form or another. And then we also have revisiting the tabled ones from last week. Next week, we will revisit any tabled proposals from last week we don't get to today, as well as any today that we decide might need a little bit more work. We also have a meeting scheduled for Thursday, June 2nd, if needed. So what I'm hoping to do here is similar to last week, to have the individual who submitted the proposal or their delegate present the proposal, explain what it is, why it is needed, and what impacts it will have. Once the proponent has shared all that background, tag members or members of the public can ask questions of the proponent to get more clarity or to better understand the proposal. In general, members of the public are welcome to participate in all discussions, just not permitted to make or second motions or vote. Throughout the discussion, anyone can propose changes to the wording of the proposal or to improve clarity or to change the requirement. The tag has great flexibility in how proposals are treated. You can approve them as submitted, you can approve them as modified, you can reject them, you can table them so additional offline work can be done, or so that you have more time to consider them before voting on them. You know, in general, now is the time in the process to ask all your questions of the proponent to ensure understanding and to propose modifications and edits to proposals to minimize changes and edits later in the process. So any questions about any of those process items before we dive in today? All right. Well, with that, we will turn over the floor to Mark to talk about the range hood ventilation proposals. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to be crystal clear on my areas of expertise. I'm a physician, practicing cardiologist with an interest in the impacts of air pollution on human health. I'm not an expert in ventilation systems, but I'm coming to you with a proposal because of concern about the health impacts of indoor air pollution, and specifically the risks of gas stoves, where cooking with gas can increase your nitrogen dioxide levels in the home to levels that would be deemed illegal by the EPA for outdoor air pollution. And we have the means to reduce these pollutants. And it's important that kids that live in a home that has gas cooking as opposed to electric cooking have a 40% increase risk of asthma symptoms. And nitrogen dioxide also increases your risk of heart attack and stroke. So it doesn't just impact the kids, it just happens to impact the kids worse than adults. There are two ways we could go about reducing this risk. One would be to have all electric cooking, which may not be as practical, it'd be nice, but the other approach is just in homes that have gas, have a means of reducing the concentration of pollutants rapidly to less toxic levels, and that would be increase ventilation rates. Because I'm not an expert in ventilation per se, Johnny Coker from RMI is with me to help me with any questions you all have on things like the flow rates, et cetera. We have two proposals. One is a mechanical code, one is residential code proposal, really addressing the same issue.
Yeah, and just for the code language itself, this is adapted from what was recently passed in California for basically increasing range hood ventilation rates for the Title 24 for the new code. It was based off of research done by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which found that at these specific ventilation rates for gas ranges, that they reduce the likelihood of pollutants getting into the house. And because of the way, like a smaller home is going to have a higher concentration of pollutants than a larger home when burning from a gas stove. Based on the size of the home, if it's smaller, then it needs a larger capture efficiency or ventilation rate. But it's essentially the same language adapted from Title 24 to match the IECC format.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Johnny. We will open it up for discussion. Nancy, go ahead.
Well, I wholeheartedly support this issue. I've been following the research from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Also, for those of you who don't know, I'm indoor air quality specialist, environmental health specialist at the Washington State Department of Health. I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I can't speak to the specifics, but are we requiring these to exhaust to the outside now? Because that's been my other issue as long as I've been involved with this, is recirculating fans through poor filters are not adequate.
Yeah, I believe that it's required to exhaust outside. I think that was a requirement beforehand.
Well, if it was, it came in place when I wasn't paying attention. Can somebody remind me when that happened? I'm sure Eric can. He knows that.
Yeah, I can address that. Correct. The Washington State Mechanical Code does allow for local exhaust in the kitchen and recirculating range hoods. So that is an option that's in the code. So
it can still be these cheap recirculating fans that don't do really any good at all.
if you have local exhaust in the kitchen itself. So you're still required to have an exhaust grill to outside in the kitchen. Whether that's typically that would be a continuous exhaust grill if you're going that way. So connected to the ERV and then go to, a recirculating hood above the range that I don't know about, unless the tag removed that as part of the 2021 start of the code process, then that was an option in the 2018 code. So.
Well, all the research I've seen to date, and some of you may have been following it closer, shows that you really need this capture over the source at the stove to be effective.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. I think next up, Kevin had his hand up. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, I dropped my hand. I think Andrea's up, but then I put my hand up again. So I'll yield to Andrea.
Okay, Andrea.
Thank you. So we are opposed to this proposal simply because
what we found in research, and the California Air Resources Board actually cites this as well, that cooking what you cook, not necessarily the fuel type of what you're cooking on, affects indoor air quality. And as well as that, as the performance of vented range hoods varies by manufacturer. And so they don't necessarily always operate at their optimal performance rating. And so we're just concerned that this is going to add cost when maybe the most effective form of ventilation could be utilized in other ways. And so for that reason, we're going to be voting against this proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Kevin.
Yeah, I had a few questions about the proposal. The first has to do with ASTM E3087. I was talking with Randy Cooper with the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. He mentioned that that particular standard, how did he put it, is, sorry, I think he said non-reproducible. I'll get the exact quote here in a second, but the concern is that it's not a well-baked standard for capture efficiency. They're still working the kinks out on it, and it's difficult, therefore, for manufacturers to meet it. Yeah, it says repeatable or reproducible is the issue. So the industry is working on a better capture efficiency standard, and are obviously interested in having hoods that are effective. And this is working its way through ASHRAE 62.2, the ventilation standard. And the issue of the ASTM test, but also these airflows. And I believe, and I said I had a question. So is there any possibility of putting this off until there's a more effective standard?
I can respond to that. So I believe that the research that Lawrence Berkeley National Lab had done actually looked at a number of kitchen range hoods that would actually be able to comply with the ASTM standard as well as the capture efficiency. And they found that most range hoods already complied for less than 180 CFM. And then as you go up, there are still a number of products that were available that did comply with that standard. I can get the exact number, but I don't think that this would reduce the likelihood of compliance or likelihood that products would be available. And I can definitely check with LBNL to make sure that that's accurate, but that was my understanding based on the research.
Great. And had another question. It looks like these numbers come out of that LBNL study, and from what I can see, they derive these numbers from an airflow model. I wondered if that model has been validated with actual testing or if it's more theoretical.
I believe that they did actual testing, but I would have to ask the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab specifically.
And then another question, you'd mentioned that it sounded like this was primarily to remove pollutants from gas cooking, but obviously it's for electric heat as well. Clearly cooking itself generates a lot of particulate and volatile organic compounds and other products of combustion from cooking itself. Is the intent here to create a differential based on that single study, or is there more research to be done to establish what needs to be exhausted and what rate needs to be exhausted at?
The study that was done by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab also looked at other, I think UCLA studies as well, so it wasn't just LBNL, but they were specifically looking at the ventilation rate in order to address the pollutants, and they did find that there would need to be a differential between electric and natural gas range, because although both do create pollutants, and I'll let Mark and Nancy speak further, natural gas produces specific kinds of pollutants at a higher rate than electric does.
And so the concern here, and we're not, cooking in general releases a lot, but if you, and again, my expertise isn't on ventilation rates, it's on the health end. The health impacts of cooking with gas per se, as opposed to cooking in general, are significant. That's been pretty well worked out. That's not a single study. And so the compelling reason to act is there. And I think what you all who have expertise in ventilation rates can debate is how can we best reduce the concentrations of those pollutants that are having adverse impacts on our kids right now.
And I guess I want to, first of all, I forgot to say this at the beginning, I appreciate the effort to, as Nancy had noted, get these fumes out of the kitchen, and that capture at the source has been shown to be the most effective means for that. I'm more familiar with the Oregon code, which does require exhaust to the outside. So would like to see that absolutely codified. Also appreciated that you're trying to get automatic control in there so that the hood actually operates when cooking occurs, because right now it's up to the user to make that choice. And that's, I mean, sometimes you might turn it on, sometimes you might not. So it's good to have that interlock. As far as the sound rating, I'm quite familiar with the SON rating system. It attempts to get how should I say this? Characterize the sound based on how the human ear responds. But I was curious how you arrived at the 3 SON number. I think that came right out of the study, but was there other thought about that?
Yeah, that was specifically what was found through the study and what was used in Title 24.
And has that been a, how do I put this, an agreeable number on the side of the consumer?
It's a great question. Based off what was put in the LBNL study and what California agreed upon, I assume that they would pass code that would be agreeable to the consumer.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other, yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. Great questions. Any other questions for the proponents there? Okay. Yeah, Kevin, sorry, are you done?
Yeah, I think I got my questions in. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy, go ahead.
Okay, just a couple things. Number one, this research has been going on for a long time. And I think California has worked really hard to incorporate, the California Air Resource Board pays in many ways for this research and then incorporates it. So they provide a great model for the state. It doesn't matter. Gas stoves are worse than electric in terms of you've got a whole other number of pollutants that cause harm. I've seen a lot of really bad practice, and we're seeing it in health effects for children and adults. I also know I've worked with Vern Inns, and some of you might have known him. He was on this committee for a number of years. He passed away just recently. He helped us buy model of exhaust fan for our kitchen, because when we bought one off the counter, it was not adequate. I was so frustrated. So we had to go to whatever source Vern helped us find to put a decent exhaust fan in our kitchen. And we have electric. I think that there's a lot of bad product out there and cheap product, and anything we can do to help move the standards so that it's actually doing what we need, which is exhausting the pollutants and the particulates. If you guys want studies, I've been collecting them for a number of years. But, you know, the person buying a home doesn't know this. and they don't know how inadequate the exhaust ventilation that they do have is to use. So obviously, I'm not the ME, so I don't know the specifics, but I am very enthusiastic about following the model that California's done. EPA is getting into this too. They've been running webinars and doing research on it.
Thanks, Nancy. I think, Andrea, you're next up there.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo kind of what Nancy was talking about. It's like manufacturing isn't there. I think what we're getting at here with fuel type, it's kind of like a moot point at this point. And that one of the worst things you can do in your kitchen is to self-clean your oven, whether that is gas or electric. And so as manufacturing of different ventilation products, range hoods, et cetera, gets more, conscience on the air quality thing, I think it'll catch up. But I don't know that we necessarily need to adopt a code that, forces them to do it right away. So.
Thanks, Andrea. Eric.
Yeah, a couple of comments or questions. So I guess in section 403.4.7.3.4, and then I think it's on the bottom of that page. So item 1 talks about the testing. What's not mentioned in the testing at all is the makeup air condition for the testing. As we know, in most of these multifamily projects that now have super tight building envelopes, and the mechanical code allowing, no makeup air to the kitchen unless you go above 400 CFM or whatever, 300 to 400 CFM. I can't remember the exact value on the range hood. So most of these range hoods don't require any makeup air. And, as a mechanical engineer, our plan sets say the source of makeup air is someone opening their operable window in these super tight buildings. Because makeup air is exempt based on, group R2 occupancies not having to maintain pressure equalization per chapter 6 of the code. So I guess I was wondering, what the conditions were for testing these hoods for this study, and, was it done, was the envelope air barrier, was this done in an actual building, and how was makeup air measured? Because makeup air is kind of the biggest thing, to actually getting decent flow rates and having decent capture. So that's one question I have. My second comment has to do with the item 2 that's shown there. That's, directing the state building or allowing the state building code council to determine another certified product performance rating standard. And I guess that language should have a close look by council staff or the tag. Is that a function we want the state building code council to do? The state building code council doesn't enforce codes. We just help implement codes. So yeah, is that the appropriate language to be in there, would be my second comment. And then probably taking a look at, I don't know if this testing included any of the recirculating range hoods, or these are all, ducted range hoods. As I noted in the chat, both, the 2018 Washington State Mechanical Code allows for that. And so unless in the 2021 IMC allows for recirculating range hoods when you have local exhaust in the kitchen. I don't know if someone can answer a question if both ducted range hoods were tested and recirculating range hoods, and are those part of the standard or not, and if there needs to be further work done to address that.
Thanks, Eric. Mark or Johnny, you want to respond to?
Yeah, I can respond to 2 of those questions. I can't respond to whether the State Building Codes Council wants to get into determining compliance, and if they don't, then open to discussing an alternative way. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I can ask LBNL staff. I believe that they looked at existing buildings. I assume not necessarily new homes. So I'm assuming that they probably had leakier envelopes than what would be a new building. So there probably wasn't an issue. Eric, just to correct, your concern is that if the envelope is so tight and there isn't makeup air, that there might be like negative pressure built up and wouldn't be.
Yeah, so yeah, just to clarify, so if hoods were tested in single family homes have a lot more surface area to the exterior that allows for natural infiltration to run these devices. In a multifamily project, which is what we see mostly under the mechanical code. I understand this is also an IRC proposal, but under the mechanical code, pressure equalization is not required for these group R2 systems. So things like clothes dryers and clothes dryers, intermittent bathroom exhaust, and range exhaust are all exempt from pressure equalization. And so, if occupants aren't informed that they need to open their windows, or the testing for this doesn't say that you have to have your window open, if that's the plan for makeup air per the engineer record, they're planning to use that exception, then we probably should clarify a statement that makeup air should be configured as required for the building, per the building engineer record. So I can help work on some code language to specify that if needed. So
that's a great point too, because based on the structure of this, a smaller multifamily unit would actually have a higher exhaust ventilation range, which would cause a higher differential. The pressure will be increased for a 750 square foot home, which will have even less leakage. So
so if you look at your average studio apartment that's got 12 feet of perimeter exterior wall, that most of that air is going to be coming from the corridor or from the neighbor's unit when you turn on your range hood, unless your operable window is open. So
we don't want people to get sucked up through their kitchen.
Well, and all kidding aside, those, the smaller dwellings, the multifamily apartments are at higher risk, not lower risk here. So we want, from my vantage point, focusing on the health, we want to make sure we do this right.
Exactly.
And then the last point was, I don't
have an answer for you on the recirculation. I didn't realize that was something I was allowed. So we definitely want to fix that if that's an issue currently.
Well, so just so you know, as we move towards, we've done several passive house projects where they want to use the recirculating range hoods. Some of them have been in types of facilities that have very low cooking use, but they still have a range. And so they're really trying to optimize the energy performance, and instead of looking at the continuous exhaust from the kitchen at the low ventilation rate and the recirculating above. So just knowing if there are any recirculating hoods that meet these standards or not would be part of that, but it's definitely part of the passive house standards have specific requirements to allow the recirculating range, and so that has been a common approach for projects going up for high energy efficiency.
Thanks, Eric. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I think Ian, Casey, you're next.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And I just want to thank Eric for those comments. I think it's a very astute point that, in multifamily applications, all these exhaust sources add up. You're talking 280 CFM on this range hood. You got dryer venting, bath venting. Where's that infiltration or makeup air going to come from? I think it's probably a bigger issue that's not going to get settled here today, but I definitely thank Eric for bringing up those points, because you're also IAQ type indoor air quality issues, about contaminants in the air, but also humidity issues. And all these sources, if you don't provide adequate air, it's not going to adequately exhaust them and create some more issues. So just a comment there to thank Eric for that. And kind of in general, about the testimony here today, I think everybody's agrees that the cooking process itself does put off quite a bit of contaminants in the air. Also, nuisance odors is a concern. I just wanted to pose the question to the proponent, if they would support having this increased rate that's listed right now for a gas range, also for the electric range.
Just to clarify, this would be an increase on the electric range, I believe, over base. It's just there is a further increase over natural gas based on the research that natural gas does produce certain pollutants at higher rates than electric. And it's also a requirement for automated hood for both, which doesn't currently exist. So this would actually increase ventilation for both electric and gas in actuality, because it would actually turn on.
Well, and I guess, is there any downside to accepting this higher CFM rate for the electric? I mean, is there any reason to oppose this higher CFM rate over an electric range?
Research doesn't support that it's needed. It would be extra cost for no reason.
Does the proponent have any comment?
Yeah, we're clearly not opposed at PSR to improving ventilation regardless. The concern that caused us to look into this was the increased risk of cooking with gas. To be crystal clear on that, and several people have brought up that all cooking releases volatile organics and particulates, and that's true. Gas is worse, particularly in terms of nitrogen dioxide, and that's clearly a risk for asthma. And so the reason we are asking for further increases in ventilation rates for gas cooking is because it increases the risk of asthma by 40%. I want to be crystal clear why. That's the why.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Mark. Ian, any other questions?
That's it for me right now.
Thank you. I think Nancy, your hand was up next.
I don't want to short circuit the discussion, but should we table this for the next week for some further consideration of the things that have been discussed?
I think that's very likely to happen. I definitely though want to continue the discussion and make sure any other concerns or comments get brought to the surface. So in the interim, we can address all of those. Thanks, Nancy. Was that all? Anything else?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, great.
For now. You can imagine I'm very happy with this discussion. This has been a huge issue.
Okay, Kevin.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to what Eric was saying. I believe as you said, the cutoff for makeup air requirement is 400 CFM. That's what is in the international code anyway. And also wanted to correct what I said earlier. I said that the Oregon code requires exhaust to the outside. However, Oregon code does have that same exception that if you have general exhaust, you can have a recirculating hood. So I stand corrected. And I was curious too, the proponent has mentioned a couple times the 40% increase for asthma symptoms. Was there a particular study that comes from?
Many studies.
Yeah, I can provide that to you. I'll put it in the chat.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Anything else there?
That's it for me.
All right, Eric. You're muted.
Krista, could you scroll up so towards the top of the proposal to the table for that table? So based on how I read this, since this table is only referenced by the intermittent flow rate, that you could, as long as you're following the continuous path, whether you did a recirculating range or an ducted exhaust range, as long as you follow the continuous exhaust path from your kitchen with the 30 CFM continuous, you'd still be able to put in any kind of range hood that you wanted. So that may be some sort of, seems like there's some sort of clarification that we required to force people for what folks do if they want to follow that continuous path and do the local exhaust. So I think that's a loophole we need to close.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I wasn't really sure what to do in that situation, so I left it alone. But I'm open to ideas on what that might look like.
Yeah,
I might reach out to you specifically because you've had a lot of great good faith questions about changes to be made, and might reach out to ask on how we might be able to improve the language to be more enforceable.
so yeah, I guess the big decision point for the tag will be, whether we continue to allow the recirculation hoods or, with the continuous exhaust, local exhaust in the room, or whether that's not going to continue based on, health and wellness. And so, yeah, I don't know if the tabling this proposal might want to direct the proponent to develop language either way, so you can vote next week or whatnot. So, or you could vote on that now, I guess, and decide how we want the language developed. So,
Yeah, my sense is an offline working group on this to resolve some of these questions, and coming back with multiple options sounds like a great idea. So the tag has choices. Thanks, Eric. Kim.
Yeah, thank you. My comment is more of a question about the controls. I think that if this is passed in terms of enforcement, the language in the control section, I think could use a little bit more clarity. Currently, it just says shall be designed to operate as needed. So I don't know if the proponent would want to consider more specific language similar to what's in 50711 for commercial hoods. To clarify the interlock and when it needs to turn off and things, so that if this is enacted, it would actually function as intended. That's all.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Johnny, any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I might reach out to you, Kim, to work on that.
Great.
Valerie.
Yeah, this table actually eliminates the use of downdraft hoods. It says hood over the range. So it eliminates downdraft hoods. The table does. And then in 403.4.7.2, there's an exception for range hoods and downdrafts for the HVI listing. So this actually is, you need to change that code section as well. Another thing that is kind of problematic with the different CFMs for natural gas versus electricity. In a home, a lot of times people don't know if they're going to have electric or gas range, so they put both in for the owner, and the owner can change that range at any time. So I think it would be prudent to have the exact number for both, because it's kind of problematic to have two different CFMs for a piece of equipment that somebody can replace on their own. And that's all I had.
Thanks, Valerie.
Yep.
Nancy. You're muted.
Sorry. Is it possible at this point to address the recirculating hood issue? I mean, that's a long-standing public health concern, both for health from particulates and VOCs, but also moisture. And the fact that those filters are pretty lousy, in all honesty, that from everything I've seen.
I think that could be a possibility if you wanted to work with the proponents to address that issue, and if the cost data and everything is updated to incorporate that change. I think that's viable since it's all linked to the same topic, and the outcome that everyone is, better indoor air quality seems to be from cooking the point of this particular proposal.
Okay, if they wanted to contact me, that would be great.
I would definitely contact you, Nancy.
Will do.
Kim, you still have your hand up.
I'm sorry, I should have put it down.
You're good. Okay, great discussion, great questions. Eric.
I guess to follow up on Valerie's comments, so I mean, the code language could say we're anywhere a natural gas, connection is provided, or I don't know if should it say natural gas, or are there still propane stoves out there somewhere? Anyways, whether fossil fuel connection is provided, that you have to use the higher airflow rate, even if you haven't, so somehow we could add a footnote or something to the table. So
there are propane hookups in rural parts of our state for sure. And I would be okay with making the requirement for gas or propane compatible where they're hooked up, and so that it's available. The increased ventilation is available regardless of the homeowner choice. I'd be okay with that. If the house is not hooked up for gas, there's no point in doing that.
correct. Okay.
Thanks, Eric. Kevin.
Sorry to keep peppering you guys with these questions, but I keep thinking of other things. So yeah, there's the testing requirement. And I was wondering, is the cost of that testing captured somewhere? Because I don't believe kitchen hoods at this point in residential are required to be tested.
I do not think that was captured in this, in the cost here.
Good deal, thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And is that something Johnny and Mark, you guys could address as part of all the comments you're capturing here?
Yep.
Great. Kevin, any thoughts?
I'm good, thank you.
Great. Well, excellent discussion. Thank you, everybody, for raising issues. Eric, back to you.
I was going to try to answer Kevin's question about whether it's required to be tested. I'm looking at section 403.472 local exhaust fans. I don't know. We'd have to research that one online. I'm not finding it fast here. So I know the whole house exhaust fan got codified that we have to test that in 2018. I don't think the local exhaust did. So
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this one? I think before we take a motion to table, and then it sounds like the proponents, Mark and Johnny, have gotten a host of feedback here of things that they can reach out to folks. It's fine to have offline meetings or working groups. Just make sure those folks that participate, it doesn't form a quorum of the tag. And then I think we would look forward to seeing a revised version of this. So with that, is anyone interested in making a motion to table?
I'll move tabling.
Thanks, Nancy. Is there a second? Would anyone like to second the motion to table this proposal?
I'll second the proposal.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Any further discussion? Actually, I don't think we can have further discussion when you table. All right. All those in favor of tabling, I think we would, I guess just to clarify the motion, there's two proposals, the one for the IMC and the one for the IRC. And I guess Nancy, is your, just to clarify your motion, is your motion to table both of those for today?
It could be. I didn't know if you had to pull it up separately or not. I'm assuming some of the same concerns will be there since we've talked about them.
Okay. And Jonathan, as the second there, are you okay with that clarification?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so everybody's clear. So all those in favor of tabling, say aye.
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 All right, I only heard two voices.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute.
Brandon, we've got three. Any opposed? Say nay.
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 Okay, I think that was 3 ayes and 2 nays. So the table has it. Okay, so I also saw in the chat, Nancy requested a quick break. So we can go ahead and do that. So why don't we take a break and we will reconvene here at 10 a.m. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to move on to the next proposal. I think this is proposal number 1 from Kevin Johnson. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. So just try to be brief. As I, over the course of my career in designing and being an engineer, I've typically installed and designed gas systems that have larger than 2-inch piping for commercial kitchens, high-rise boilers, all kinds of stuff. And over the years, I've noticed that there's this deficiency in the code where there's only 3 valve types allowed for gas piping in the current code, and the only one that applies for valves larger than 2 inches, ASME B1644. So all of these are threaded valves, but the industry, or at least in my research, contacting Apollo, Nibco, Milwaukee, and other valve manufacturers, none of them make a flanged ball valve, a flanged valve for that is a B1644, which is the only one that allows for greater than 2 inches. So our industry rarely threads pipe greater than 2 inches. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bring in a valve standard that will allow us to use flanged valves in the gas piping systems. What's gone on in the past is that typically a flange valve will be installed. It's a plug valve of some sort, but these are all the plug valves that I found are B1633, which is only good for up to 2-inch valves. but it happens. That's what we do. We put in a plug valve. We got a 3-inch, 4-inch gas pipe. We put in a plug valve. All those valves are ASME B1638, and so that's what we're trying to do here, is really just get it into the code. What has been going on in the industry for some time. I have some examples here, but basically that's it.
Great.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Kevin. Questions or comments for Kevin?
Hi, Kevin. This is Valerie with the City of
Hi,
Bellevue.
Valerie.
Hey, in the IFGC for it requires any piping larger than 4 inches to be welded. Under fittings, you can't have a threaded fitting larger than 4 inches. So that's really the only code that we have that's for welding piping, I guess you'd say. But yeah, I can see this being needed in the code.
Yeah.
And then you
go ahead.
And you will need to add it to the references as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't. I think Valerie, way back in there. Anyway, I think you and I worked on one of the projects in the 4 towers over at 8th Avenue. I think we had like 6-inch piping, and that was low pressure stuff. That was all welded, of course. But it sort of plagued me since then that, geez, I'm putting in valves that are greater than, or we're asking to put in valves that are greater than 2-inch. And while there are plug valves and ball valves that are flanged that are ASME B1633, those aren't specifically part of that standard. Is that they're not for greater than 2-inch pipe. Now the same valve, I have Apollo valves, Nibco, Milwaukee, and other valves. The same valve is both ASME B1633 and 1638. But because ASME 1638 is not in the code, typically we're not allowed, we wouldn't be allowed to install those. So I agree. And that's why we're doing it. I think this would give the industry a good option. And let's see if we need to put it in the reference. I guess we need to. Looks like Caroline, are you making the change?
Krista's driving there, I think, just to add a note to make sure that this new standard would get in there. So Kevin, is this seems like maybe not a Washington specific issue, maybe eventually something.
It's eventually something that I think needs to go to the base fuel gas code. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Any other questions or comments for Kevin? Okay. If not, looking for any sort of motion on this one.
I motion to approve the code change as amended.
Thanks, Valerie. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Jeff. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and I'm gonna sign off then.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That moves us right along to proposal 9. I think this one was originally submitted and then got a revision. So this is Mike Lubliner or his delegate. Is there anyone here who is prepared to present this proposal?
I don't think I'll say prepared, but I will do my best.
Thanks, Jonathan.
So my understanding, this particular proposal here was just to get included the 62.2 2019 version of ASHRAE as an acceptable path as well. And I believe the term balanced was very important to Mike when he designed it, to make sure that it was a balanced ASHRAE commission system for residential R2 group R2 designations.
All right, any other background info on it or explanatory information for the tag to consider?
Mike was pretty passionate about it. I believe it's a little bit more of a stringent ventilation to the mechanical. I am not up 100% on this. I do apologize. My understanding, it's just an optional path to use a little bit more of a stringent code versus going back and forth between the IRC, the IMC, and the IECC for Washington stuff.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Questions or comments on allowing 62.2? Eric, go ahead.
So I think this was discussed or has been discussed in past code cycles. The last discussion was that it would be hard to enforce for code officials to enforce both multiple different standards. So I think that's why it was left out of the code. A lot of these small multifamily residential buildings, some of them don't have engineers of record because of they're not required. So one recommendation to the tag, maybe if we're going to allow this, that the plan set has to be stamped and signed by an engineer of record, even for small projects, to give some comfort to the AHJ. This puts a higher burden on the 150 cities and counties that have to enforce the code to learn another ASHRAE standard. So that is the challenge. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other questions or comments for Jonathan? Or Jonathan, did you want to respond to that?
No, like I said, I'm not an expert on the differences between the two, but mostly the commissioning system of HVACs is already relying upon the 380 standard in Washington State, if I'm correct, for at least residential properties. So even whether it was an ASHRAE calculation or a mechanical calculation, the processes for commissioning it will be similar. I would just say that the calculation number for the CFM outcome would probably be different. And in that case, I think one's just a little bit more stringent than the other. And all of those, on all the ASHRAE stuff, can be calculated with several free tools that are on the market, like Red Calculator. There's lots of other free little tool systems and cheat cards out there through trainings that are available for this ASHRAE. If the ERI goes through the energy code as proposed, a lot of homes will be commissioned off to ASHRAE's ventilation standards as well, using that process too, just something to throw out. I understand that you're saying the jurisdictions may have to learn it, but I think they're going to have to learn it anyways.
Thanks, Jonathan. Eric, anything else to add there?
I guess does the tag need to review 62.1, 62.2 2019 and do a review of it to see if there's anything specific that is in contradiction to what we might adopt as a code. So
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I did notice it has a different definition of balanced system. And it also has, it was unclear to me with this proposal, it was just to require that specific sections of 62.2 would apply, or if it was the entire thing, in which case, to your point, there just might be additional conflicts.
So for example, we just reviewed a proposal on local exhaust. You know, does this cover just the whole house system, or does this cover the local exhaust systems also? Anyways, this being that this is at the beginning of 403.4, it's kind of unclear to me as to, yeah, is this just for the whole house ventilation system, or is this for all the different local exhaust systems also? So this would kind of nullify if it is implied that this would also apply to local exhaust systems, and you know, the range hood proposal were to pass, this could be a path to not have to do that. So I think, yeah, we have to be very careful about how we adopt this and what guard rules we put around it.
Thanks, Eric. Nancy.
Just some clarification. I was not able to attend the first hour last week. Was Mike there to explain this?
We didn't do this proposal last week. This is the first time we're talking about this one.
Okay, and I might have missed this also. Is there a reason Mike's not here to explain this? I know he's passionate about this. He's been sending me emails about it for quite some time.
My understanding is he took a new role and or had a conflict of some sort, but
well, I'm wondering if we should postpone this one to next week to give him a chance, one more chance to support this.
yeah, I guess Jonathan, as his alternate, was he intending to participate in the process moving forward, or do you have any sense of that?
My understanding was his new role at Oak Ridge National Laboratories does not allow him to advocate for code improvements or whatever. They have to stay pretty well neutral. So my understanding is all of his positions and all of the tags have been removed.
So Jonathan, do you, I mean, I know why Mike thinks this is important. And then Eric's saying he has issues with practical implementation. I guess I'm confused.
You know, my personal opinion is any ventilation system that actually works is the best one. If Mike's been very passionate about this, he's been a member of ASHRAE for a very long time, and unfortunately, I cannot convey his supporting opinions about it well enough. You are correct. He is very passionate about this, and I've known Mike long enough, and that his expertise in this area long enough that I may not understand this well enough, but I do support Mike's opinion in this. And it would be worthwhile if he could actually speak here, because like I said, he could probably speak better than I could, but unfortunately he's been unallowed to do so.
So he felt that if I understand this, that this was really important. I even watched one of these videos, but it was quite a few months ago, that this was important option for promoting healthier homes. Is there anybody else who can speak to that?
This is Eric Vandermeer. I haven't done a complete review of the latest version of 62.2 2019. So I'm not totally up to speed on all the changes. But yes, it's similar to what we have with, different language and yeah. So like I said, we could figure out how we're going to write our own ventilation code sections and then come back to this and compare that against the standard and look for differences, or put some guardrails around this, which could be that there has to be an engineer record stamping the plans that's designing this, and it has to be approved by the AHJ. You know, what is, and then specifically talk about if it's just dealing with the whole house system versus the various local exhaust systems, or both. So
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, Nancy, I think the challenge, as Eric's pointing out, is that just adopting a whole other alternative without a comprehensive comparison of our current code versus that standard. I think probably a lot of folks have the same questions that you have, and without that comparison available, that burden would fall on someone, either members of this tag or Jonathan or someone else, to kind of do that work. Austin, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I did a small dive into this ASHRAE update, and some of the bigger changes would be adding sensors and indoor air sensors from the outside, and an increase in ventilation in some areas when it comes to like bedrooms. It seemed like the balanced ventilation to individual dwelling units was a big difference between where our code is going and what the ASHRAE was doing. But this new ASHRAE 2019 was adding new pathways that were significantly different based on different strategies. And I think that's where some new code inspectors would have to really dive in and understand those changes, which are going to be significant. And it would be a challenge to make that widely known by everyone. I think it's like understanding what kind of chemicals and what kind of furniture, what kind of air particulates are going to be in a space, and then basing what the ventilation rate is based on what's inside the space. And
Austin, is that in 62.1 or 62.2?
62.2.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was for residential. So yeah, it's a major change, and yeah, it's a big overhaul. So I don't know.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks for sharing that.
I mean, yeah, there's infiltration credits, and there's average. There's a lot of terminology that we don't have in our code, right? That would be introduced. So.
And this is just providing an alternate pathway. Is that correct? This wouldn't rewrite our code. It would just provide an alternate pathway to what exists right now.
That is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
That is correct. It was just supposed to be an optional alternative path for those who wanted to try to tackle a little bit more of a more robust fresh air system, is my understanding.
Yeah, but you're giving somebody the exception to use it, so they can use it. It's an exception. So the jurisdiction would have to have a copy of ASHRAE, which they have to purchase, and then they have to know what it says. And most jurisdictions don't require a PE to stamp the plans. So the plans are going to be submitted without a PE, and then you have to turn around and tell them they need a PE if they use that exception.
Well, the requirement of a PE is something that this tag had spoke about. With the new codes that are coming through on the energy cycle, if the ERI adoption is through, any home that's ran through the ERI process will also run through an ASHRAE commissioned ventilation system. So this ASHRAE ventilation system will be coming up one way or the other through the codes in Washington State, whether it's this one or another one. I would at least recommend to be prepared for that at the minimal. I'm not saying that forces us to adopt that here. I'm just saying as cities go, they should be prepared to start seeing some of these ASHRAE compliance-based path systems in Washington emerging. So I just throwing that as a caveat to just give a heads up to people to maybe they should grab the ASHRAE book and become a little bit more familiar with it, or because it's going to come up soon. Anyways, but neither here nor there. Through the prescriptive codes, we were just given an exemption to also use the ASHRAE one, which is supposed to be more robust on the prescription path here. And so if it's not adopted here, I would definitely recommend that this group pay attention to the other groups to make sure that they can help adjust that as the ERI comes up, because I'm just saying that this is going to come in from two different spots. So just keep an eye on it. I'm just trying to be friendly in this. Is that, that's all.
Yeah, I hear you, but a lot of jurisdictions don't even have a mechanical reviewer. So this would go straight to a mechanical inspector or a building inspector to actually verify. And that would be difficult for somebody like that to read ASHRAE.
Thanks, Valerie. Nancy. Oh, take your hand down. Eric.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Just because Eric might want to respond to what I'm saying anyway. I'm thinking back to 1991 when our state adopted ASHRAE 62.1, and I believe in effect prior, ahead of the IMC adopting it. Is this what we think is going to be the new standards, and the IMC hasn't caught up with it? I guess that's kind of my question. Is this where we're headed?
Yeah,
So I don't know. I can't speak to the IMC process. The current 2021 IMC model code, has very little content on residential ventilation and what's required. So, that's one of the reasons why we have a much more robust residential ventilation section. So it still points to 62.1. It doesn't point to 62.2 at all. It's my understanding. I guess I think I just did a quick search of that, and that's what I saw. So to address one of Valerie's concerns, that this ASHRAE standard is available as a read-only standard online. So ASHRAE has stepped up and made them publicly available for standards that are referenced in the code. So anyways.
Thanks, Eric. And did you have any other comments there? No. Okay. It sounds like we have a couple choices here, obviously, like we do with all proposals. We could, or someone on the tag could table it if there's clear direction on kind of what types of changes folks would want to see. I think, at a minimum, it seems like clarifying which sections of 62.2 would apply here might be required at a minimum before we could understand at least which elements of 62.2 would be recommended, or if, I think we also heard a bit about potential burden on code officials if having this as an alternate path right now for this code cycle isn't a great decision. You can also just reject this proposal, or we can obviously just approve it as it is. So lots of choices for tag members to consider.
Do we know if Mike is barred from doing this because of his current role and some sort of influence issue, or is it that he just isn't given the time to be on these meetings?
He was not allowed to. He had to release all legacy work.
Okay, so maybe it may not be a conflict of interest. It's more of just his new. It's just not part of his new job.
I believe it's the National Labs standing policy.
Got it. Yeah, I guess my vote would be to table this for now. I haven't had a ton of time to review, and the ASHRAE standard is, I'm looking at it now, but there's a lot in it, so I'd prefer to table it.
Okay, is that a motion?
Yes, I'll move to table this amendment.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to table on the floor. Don't think further discussion is allowed, so all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay. So that one will come back. I think we will revisit it, I guess. Jonathan, are you kind of inheriting it to potentially address some of the questions or concerns raised today?
It sounds so. So I'm sure I'll be downloading that free version of ASHRAE 62.2 that's read-only I just heard about.
Okay, thanks. And Eric?
Yeah, I guess one more editorial comment would be, so Washington State Mechanical Code section 403.2 has similar language for 62.1. We might want to develop the same language as that just to be consistent, so if we're looking at alternate proposals, that language refers to specific sections, so that would be a good model to use into how to write that code to try to clarify the intent. So
Thanks, Eric. Let's see. So Krista, this is the same idea, just relative to the IRC.
Yes, and written slightly differently.
Okay, Jonathan, did you want to share any background or thoughts on how this same concept would integrate with the mechanical sections of the IRC?
Actually, I didn't do a whole lot of review on this one. I apologize, but my understanding is it's for the same purposes. They were looking for another option to use a mechanical ventilation system that would be slightly more stringent in its CFM requirements. And again, my understanding is it's supposed to require balanced ventilation for these for this commissioning process. And I think we're going to hear probably the same arguments against the other one as this one is my assumptions. Is that pretty much correct from what I'm gathering? If I was a gambling man.
I think that's a good look in the crystal ball. So yeah, I would slow to making sure the prior motion included both of these. So if you would like to make a motion to similarly table this one, that unless there's any discussion on it before that happened.
Yeah, I'd be willing to discussing or tabling this to come back with a better proposal. I'll definitely reference the stuff the gentleman was referencing just a moment ago. If he'd definitely like to be involved by any means, please reach out. I would love input from anybody, and we'll see if we can't get that a little bit better for you guys and bring it back when we revisit the table proposals.
Great. Did anyone have any specific thoughts or comments on the residential version of this? Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion on this proposal?
I'll move tabling.
Thanks, Nancy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Jeff. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay. And that moves us along to Mike's next proposal. Jonathan, was this one also on your radar to represent?
It is.
Great. floor is yours.
I believe this one is adding the exception that heat recovery or energy recovery ventilators is not required in low-rise multifamily projects. Just they're trying to keep it to balanced ventilation systems, right? And that's what they're trying to. This language here would add an exception for heat recovery and the energy recovery ventilators not required in the low-rise. I apologize. I'm just trying to scroll this, but this isn't my document. I need to open my. Could you scroll down just a little for me, please? Thank you. Change power. Yes. So again, we were just making sure that the language was pretty clear that in low-rise multifamily, balanced ventilation, but not ERVs or HRVs were required, is my understanding from this proposal.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Any questions or comments on this one, Jonathan, or anything anyone would like to bring up? Krista, do you mind scrolling back up to the actual code language? So I guess one question I had as I was looking at this one was, I think the exception could be helpful and just clarifying the requirement. But one thing that I think is interesting is that this paragraph that it would align with, states that dwelling and sleeping units in group R2 shall include supply and exhaust and be a balanced whole house ventilation system. And then that next sentence says the system shall include a heat or energy recovery ventilator with a sensible heat recovery effectiveness as prescribed in section C40336 of the Washington State Energy Code. So that is the commercial energy code, and only R2 of 4 stories or more has to comply with the commercial energy code. And so that's all to say, as it's written right now, that sentence would not apply to low-rise R2 because low-rise R2 does not comply with the commercial energy code. It complies with the residential energy code. So anyway, that's all to say, I think maybe that's the logic path that gets at, Jonathan, what you're trying to do. All that said, that is a bit, it could just be more clearly stated, because I think the intent of this proposal, just to clarify that, might make sense.
Yeah, it's just a cleanup one, is my understanding.
Okay, Eric.
Yeah, I agree that the body of the code is clear, that the second sentence that you wrote only applies to projects that are under the C sections of the code. That was how it was written. So yeah, assuming that there are no code proposals that are on the IECC residential building side of the code that would require this, then this would be essentially a redundant exception that would add clarity to the code. It sounds like this has been a problem or a question they're getting a lot, and so that's why they want to add that. So
it does. The more we discuss this, the more that definitely does click a resonating. A lot of clarification questions came to our tag, or not our tag, I apologize, to our technical code assistant hotline. Now that I have so many of these I'm trying to catch up on with Mike leaving, I apologize. But as soon as it completely resonates again. I remember Carolyn having a very lengthy conversation with Mike about this. There was a lot of code questions about whether or not low-rise multifamily had to recover energy or not in their balanced ventilation.
right, and so that this is correct technically, as long as the ERV HRV is only serving an individual dwelling unit, then it would only, and it's not required to have the whole house ventilation system's not required to have one. If they serve more than one dwelling unit, then they have to comply per commercial provisions, even though they're under the residential building sections of the energy code. So yeah, it's technically accurate and does provide some clarification, assuming there's no code proposal that changes that on the other side to correlate with. So
Mike.
I was just going to add that I was the one who proposed that C403.3.6 in the 2018 code, and that was my original intent, was that it was, as Eric just summarized, that it was the 4-story and above commercial, those who had to comply with the commercial energy code. The other thing I was just going to add, I know in the current energy code tag, there is a proposal to combine R2 into its own classification, but that is still in process. So that result is still to be determined whether they stay separate or get joined, but just as an FYI. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So I guess, Mike, a question back to you about that. If, right now, that second sentence essentially leaves it up to the energy code to say whether or not HRB is required. Whereas if we include this exception here, then it's no longer, it's like also stated in the mechanical code. And if there are swaps in where R2 lives, does that then potentially create a conflict that might not exist right now the way it's currently written?
correct, I would agree that you'd have to correlate this with the energy code if, whereas as it's currently written, you're just referencing back to the energy code.
Yeah, I apologize. I need to step away. I've got a text from my wife. She's got a cut, so I need to go help. So, but I trust Eric to go for it.
Can we add the word buildings or something after low rise?
Can we replace the word low rise?
Yeah.
Yeah, can we just delete low rise? Or do you want to say group R2 3 stories or less? I mean, it's an exception to the section about group R2, so maybe that's a little redundant, but.
Or can you say residential occupancies subject to the provisions of the residential building sections of the energy code or something?
Or even if it was, is there a way to add a footnote in here or something that says something like that instead of an exemption, like footnote, please reference, residential requirements for 3 stories or less. I mean, I don't know if the exception has to be the actual word. We're just looking for clarification because this was I remember this one, and I think there was a very big one in Vancouver on this one too that it called, and we had a very lengthy discussion on it back and forth between several people. It's become kind of complicated. We're just looking for some help, and we appreciate it. So I don't care if it's a footnote or an exemption or a reference to, or however you guys wish to rewrite this to where it makes sense and it's usable. We just want to make sure it's a little bit more clearly spelled out for the city so they have a little easier time with it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm wondering if it's not really an exception because the paragraph above doesn't require it. Is it just better as a sentence after the second sentence? If essentially that, what do you think of that, Eric? If the heat recovery or that would start after the Washington State Energy Code at the end of that sentence?
Yeah, you could change it to say something like for commercial buildings, and then for residential buildings. But those are defined terms only in the IECC, not really in the mechanical code, but. And then I guess ERV, HRV in residential buildings is part of the option point system, right? So it's not required, but it could be an option point they're going after. So anyways.
Okay, well, maybe I hate to table another one. Does anyone else want to chime in with a better thought on? Yeah, I guess, Krista, do you think it's better as exception, or should that sentence just be in the body of that paragraph as additional clarification?
I don't really have a preference either way.
You could say something or where selected as an option per R 406, you know, so then it just implies that it's not required in the main body of the paragraph.
So heat recovery or energy recovery ventilation is an option in group R2 building 3 stories or less per the.
Well, I was just thinking in the second sentence in the paragraph, you could say as prescribed in section C403.3.6, or when selected as an option as part of R406.
There you go.
I like that.
I like it.
C or R406?
R406.
I guess I got to go check R406.
No, you're right. It's in the R406, unless they decide to move it in the energy code to match the national's R408 or something like that, you know, for, I don't know. It might move, it might not, you know, I doubt it. It's gonna be, you have to rewrite that section with the new 2021 section.
Yeah, and Jonathan, are you on the residential energy code as well? Okay.
I am, and I'm actually way much more knowledgeable about that one. So if I please have more faith in me in that meeting than this one.
We've got all the faith in you. I think it would be more just keeping tabs on, yeah, that discussion around where R2 lands, because what we approve or do here just might need to be a little bit revisited. I think the intent would always, well, would retain the same, although it might depend on what the energy code tag decides to do. So,
And that decision by the tag probably won't be made until after this tag is finished their deliberation. So it might need to move to the MVE committee meeting to correlate those changes.
okay, that makes sense.
So Chris, I was thinking that would go in front of the Washington State Energy Code. So both of them refer to the Washington State.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments on this one? Okay, so looking for some sort of motion, I think.
I'm not certain if that's something that I can do, is it? Seems how
You can do that, yeah.
Oh, I am. Go ahead, and I guess I'm motion to accept as modified by the tag.
Thanks, Jonathan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Nancy. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I think that moves us along to proposal 76. An IMC proposal, another proposal about ventilation. So Eric, the floor is yours to present that one.
Let me open this up a second. Hold on. Okay, so this one's gone through three iterations in the last week based on input from folks. This is a proposal to attempt, as most of you know, in the 2018 code cycle, we adopted a brand new residential ventilation code section. So there was a lot of work to rewrite this. There is an interpretation that was issued by the State Building Code Council to clarify some points that have been unclear to folks. So this is primarily intended to address those two, the main two issues that are covered with that interpretation, which is how these interior adjoining spaces are required to be ventilated versus the exterior rooms in the residences. Again, this is proposed for the IMC, but so we'll focus on that first. And then to clarify balanced versus not balanced and distributed versus not distributed ventilation systems. So I have received some feedback from City of Seattle and some other folks on just what kind of questions they have been getting about this and where things are unclear. So I'll walk through the latest round of my proposed changes. I'm of course willing to take feedback on this and come back next week with how the tag would like this to be written. So I guess let's talk about interior adjacent rooms versus interior adjoining spaces. Krista, can you scroll down to the diagrams at the end? So in a lot of these multifamily, and we've had various provisions through the last 3 or 4 code cycles on how we treat these interior spaces. Typically, these are interior rooms within the apartments that are oftentimes bedrooms, or sometimes are studies or dens within the units. Most of the time they're on the interior of the building. Sometimes you have a 0 lot line configuration like the one you see at the top of the page here, where it's actually on an exterior wall, but there can't be any windows on that because it's a 0 lot line configuration, and so there's an adjacent building or something there. So I'm creating, based on discussions with City of Seattle, they thought it would be simplest to create some defined terms. And I originally had started with adjacent room or an adjoining space. Unfortunately, those words are used throughout the building code in various places as undefined terms. So I chose to make it a more specific term and call them interior adjacent room and interior adjoining space. So it's a very specific term that we can apply and would only then apply to how we're using it in this section of the mechanical code. So we're creating 2 of these. So the basic idea here is that an interior adjacent room has no openings, doors, or windows to the outside, and it has no permanent opening to another room. So most of the time, the developers of these projects and the occupants want that to have a bedroom door on it. So they want to have a sliding doors or something to close that off. And so that does not meet the definition of the building code or the mechanical code for an interior adjoining space, because it can be closed off. It has to be a permanent opening to meet that definition. And in the past code cycles, we've allowed the transfer fan from the main living area to transfer the ventilation area into the interior room. And so that's a whole house ventilation fan that's just continually cycling air and has, you know, specific requirements for controls and such in our code that's, you know, not found in 62.2 and other things. So so we have created these two definitions for interior adjoining rooms, which have either the transfer fan, or we're going to introduce also a relief fan option that's connected to the ERV, so to the exhaust side of the ERV. So we're either have a transfer fan to draw in the ventilation air on that interior space, or we're continually you know, relieving air, exhausting air through the ERV to draw air through that space continuously. So that's the first type of space. The second is the interior adjoining space, which has the permanent opening and therefore can be ventilated from the adjacent space as we've allowed in the passcode cycle. So I guess questions on what those two terms are before we go any further? Okay, so let's go through the code proposal. So we've introduced a definition to describe those. So an interior adjacent room is an enclosed room without exterior windows or openings to the outdoors, located within a dwelling or sleeping unit that does not have an interior unobstructed openings as required for interior adjoining spaces. So that's the proposed definition for that. The proposed definition for interior adjoining space is going to refer to the naturally ventilated section of Chapter 4, which requires, so it's a room or space without openings to the outdoors that is naturally ventilated through a habitable space by an unobstructed fixed openings in accordance with that. And so that section gives you the size of the opening, the 25 square feet is typically what is required as the fixed opening. So the other thing to note here is that what was unclear in our code is whether an exterior bedroom or an exterior living room, something that has a window, if that has to have supply ventilation to that room. And so the intent of the 2018 code was that all exterior bedrooms and all exterior living spaces have supply of outdoor air directly to that habitable space. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to clarify. I've seen a couple plan sets be approved and, you know, gotten no comments and projects be built with the exterior bedrooms of the project, you know, using a transfer fan or other means, treating them like interior adjoining spaces. So during the 2018 code cycle, that was a point that we discussed, and we decided to stay consistent with how we had treated it in past code cycles, that all the exterior spaces would receive direct ventilation air from them. So again, we have our definition of balanced whole house ventilation. I'm recommending adding dwelling or sleeping unit to that definition. We added the definition for proposing adding a definition for what is a not balanced. So as you know, the group R2 units are required for section 403.4.4.1 to have balanced ventilation systems. And so that has been unclear in the code. And so if you are an R2 occupancy, you have to be balanced. If you're an R1 hotel or another type of occupancy, R3, you don't have to be balanced. So we're trying to have a clear definition of what is not balanced and provide pointers there. So the next thing under distributed whole house is requiring the interior adjacent rooms and the interior adjoining spaces to be ventilated. And that is included in the list. It was included in the last list as adjoining spaces. So those are ventilated somehow. And then we'll see the exceptions later. And then we have a definition for what is not distributed. And the whole thing about not distributed is that you have to be, you are allowed to, you were required by the 2018 code to be distributed on the supply side, but you could be undistributed on the exhaust side, which then just triggers the undistributed factor. Here, we've also now clarified that if you're choosing to not directly duct ventilation into your interior adjacent room or into your interior adjoining space, that you do have to increase the amount of ventilation. So we've introduced that it is acceptable now to be not balanced on the supply side when you have when you're not directly supplying the interior adjacent spaces or adjoining spaces. And we'll see how that works in the code further on. So those are the new definitions that are proposed. Maybe I pause there to see if anybody has questions or comments on that. Okay. So from there, adding some italicized to the code where things didn't get italicized to distribute. And then we added some pointers to the distributed versus not distributed and balanced versus not balanced ventilation quality adjustment table. So now we have clear pointers to the definitions for what is applying here. So this is where you're increasing the amount of ventilation because you're not balanced or not distributed. So those are just pointers. So then we have our statement here that's been unclear to folks is the last sentence in section 403.441 there that says the whole house supply fan shall provide ducted outdoor air to each habitable space within the residential unit. So like we said, that was required by code. There wasn't specific exceptions. And that's the statement that's telling you that you basically had to be distributed on the supply side, which was not clear in the definitions. So, so we have that statement that you have to be distributed. And now we have two statements saying, well, on the supply side, you can not take the ducted outdoor air to each habitable space, only for the interior adjoining space or the interior adjacent room. And then it has a clear statement that if you're doing that, you're considered not distributed and you have to apply the appropriate corrections that we saw above. So those are the two exceptions to not supplying air to each habitable space within the residence. And then we go down and we have the same statements here for the other than group R occupancies. So again, if you had a hotel that had one of these interior adjoining spaces, they would now have the same exceptions or options. So then we keep going down. So we're leaving the transfer fan statement there. So if you're using the transfer fan to ventilate the interior adjacent room, that you have to meet the zone ratings for the whole house fans, and you have to have ventilation and controls for that section. So that remains, but we remove we remove the other section. So this was our statement to allow the interior adjoining spaces. It really didn't get applied to the right section. And that's where the unclarity in the code kind of partially arrived from. So any questions on that before I move on? Nancy, it looks like you have your hand up. So
Yeah, sorry, I'm probably totally lost in this, but if you go back a little ways to where I think in this area, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. You've got interior bedrooms with no windows. Is
correct.
that correct? And what type of facilities are these? Are high-rise apartment buildings?
Low rise, mid rise, yeah, we see these all over the place, yes.
Okay, just from a public health perspective, that's horrifying to me. And now you're saying that they're not getting ducted outside air to these interior bedrooms. They're getting air from other rooms with other activities.
Correct. Within their residence, we've allowed this for the last 3 or 4 code cycles to have a transfer fan to either have the permanent opening that's 25 square feet, or have a transfer fan if they're enclosing them.
So whatever goes on in the kitchen is going to end up, or the living room or the dining room, let's hope not the bathroom, is going to end up in the bedroom.
Correct. That's what happens. Yes.
But I guess, Eric, the clarification you're providing is that then that's considered not distributed. Therefore, you need to amplify the overall amount of ventilation.
Correct. You increase the amount of ventilation to the unit by 25% because you are transferring from another space.
I don't suppose it's too late to just require that it be outside air to the bedrooms.
Yes, that is an option as of always, but yeah, that's not how the code's currently written. So that would be making the code, yeah, more restrictive, but yes.
Okay, well, I'm just horrified at this whole idea, but it doesn't sound like.
Well, so a lot of people are doing this on the exterior bedrooms right now because of the way the code is written. So we need to make sure we get that clarified, that all the exterior bedrooms for sure have to have ventilation. So.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure you'll get with SEC D2.2. So.
All right, I didn't know what was, obviously I don't pay attention to residential very much. So this is just unfortunate in my view, but okay, thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. So Eric, I guess one follow-up then, in your view, all of the definitions and the clarifications and all, it really is clarification of the intent of kind of the massive overhaul that happened in 2018 rather than changing.
Yeah, I'm trying to write this to maintain status quo of what we've had in past code cycles and to make it clear. And I think I have another mistake I found that I'll have to fix at least. So, but that I probably can't do on the fly here. But anyways.
Well, thanks so much. Any other questions or comments for Eric on this proposal?
So I guess scrolling down there is one more change that's proposed in here that's not, yeah, that's that change. So as part of this provision, you know, that was added in the 2018 code by the proponent was regulating the velocity of the air that's coming in and coming out of the ventilation openings. And so as we adopted last code cycle in section 401, we are allowing for these combination inlet outlet fittings that are engineered fittings. And 62.2 exception 4 of section 6.8 is essentially the section that regulates these, and they have to show that the amount of re-entrainment of the air going out from one unit from the air coming in is less than 10% is the criteria that's in 62.2. Mike Moore reached out to me and said that this is changing in the 2024 version of 62.2, and I'm not totally up to speed on what's going on there. But these inlet outlet combination fittings, I have no idea what velocities they're using. they're already allowed per our code. So we're looking to add an exception that since these are engineered fittings that have been tested with the equipment to meet these standards. So I'm trying to get a clear pointer here to 62.2 and, you know, that section that regulates essentially these fittings. But the part I lost when my last revision yesterday was, I'll have to add that back in, I lost part of the transfer fan thing, so I need to fix that. So I think we're gonna have to table this so I can fix that. But so I guess what I'm looking for direction from on the tag is, yeah, is there comments, questions, things I want to be addressed? Do we want to make the code more restrictive than it currently is, like Nancy was alluding to? Or are we planning on maintaining status quo? But you know, most of all this language about interior adjoining spaces and adjacent spaces is not specifically covered by, you know, 62.2, for example. And you know, this is where our code has gotten very specific over the last 20 years, and ASHRAE tends to be more of a broad standard than specific code.
Well, thank you, Eric, for such a thorough proposal. Does anyone have any other feedback for Eric as he makes a couple more minor modifications to bring this one back at a later time?
I think it helps the intent of the code to clarify this. I think it's needed.
Thanks, Valerie. Okay, well, hopefully next time around, this one will be a quick consideration, but it sounds like Eric wants to make a few more edits. So unless there's any further discussion, we would be looking for a motion on this one.
I make the motion to table this to next meeting.
Thanks, Valerie. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Nancy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This Monday. And can we get a copy of it, please, before the next meeting?
Yeah, it's a minor edit. I need to fix the 2 exception 2, so I should be able to post that or send that.
And this version is posted on the tag meeting attached documents.
So yeah, tomorrow afternoon I should be able to get that over to you, Krista. So it won't take long.
All right, I'm gonna just try that again. All those in favor of tabling, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Nay? All right. Great. And yeah, that's a great reminder. Krista does an awesome job of trying to keep the agendas updated with links to the latest versions of things that are submitted. And for those of you, for things we did table, and those of you who are going to work to modify your proposals, just a reminder that it is, you know, I think our next meeting is next Thursday. So if you could try to get any edits by end of day Tuesday at the very latest. So tag members have at least Wednesday to review the latest versions. That would be great. All right. Everybody doing okay? Does anyone need a quick break before we move on to the next one? Or shall we carry on? All right, we will continue forward. This one is from Reed Rushing. Eric, are you going to be speaking on behalf of this one?
Yeah.
Okay, take it away.
And we've done a bunch of research since this. I guess I forgot to forward that. So intake locations 401.4, this section's changed over the code cycles. Item 2 essentially says all intake locations have to be 10 feet horizontally from a street or an alley or a parking lot. And then that says if you're not 10 feet horizontally, that you have to be 25 feet above such locations. So we've been recently working on some projects that have essentially parking directly below. So these are kind of rural area multifamily. So we have, we have a single level of parking under, and then maybe 3 or 4 levels of residences above the directly above the parking area. And so there's no way to get an outdoor air intake for every ERV, within that first story above. So you have to essentially, we're calling them on the project snorkels. You're taking, a snorkel up to the floor above to get 25 feet above grade, essentially, because you got parking, an open parking garage directly below your facility. And so it's an extreme cost for all these little 100 CFM intakes for every residential unit. So this is attempting to add an exception that you only have to be 10 feet above the parking lot. And maybe we can obviously negotiate on that distance some. But this is, maybe we want to change it to 15 feet above. But ASHRAE 62.1 has various distances, and they're all measured from the anticipated source of exhaust per ASHRAE 62.1. So in the case of a parking place or a street, you're technically measuring from where you think the tailpipe on the vehicle is going to be to where your outdoor air intake is. And so again, 62.1 is not really all that enforceable code in this manner. It's very hard to determine where a tailpipe on a truck or a vehicle may be. And so instead of that, the IMC adopted this 25-foot rule. And ASHRAE has different, distances for a garage entry is 15 feet, a truck and loading dock area is 25 feet, and a driveway, street, or parking place, where cars are typically parked at and not moving, is 5 feet. So I can provide some additional backup on this that we've now typed up for some code alternates on projects. But essentially, we're looking for an exception for intake air openings that are serving small systems. Again, we chose 1,000 CFM. We could take that maybe down to 500 if we want to limit it further. But that we can decrease from this 25-foot above distance for small intakes. So that's the goal of this proposal. As said, we're willing to modify the language or provide more backup, but it's hard to achieve the 10-foot horizontal when you have parking that's directly below what's above. So
Thank you so much, Eric. Nancy, I think you had your hand up first.
Hi. Okay. You know me, I've got questions about something like this. The modeling I've seen from NIST, the National Institutes for Science and Testing, or whatever it's called, they've done on carbon monoxide exhaust from generators and shown that you need at least 25 feet separation to prevent entrainment into homes that can cause carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's 25 feet. car exhaust, you're talking about residential parking underneath, so it's not continual exhaust production, it's periodic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways this proposal could be clarified is to only lower the distance to the parking lot surface itself, or to the parking surface, and not make an exception for streets or the entryway to the parking garage. So for example, if you have a residential unit that's directly above the main entrance to their parking garage, they would then be forced to maintain the 25-foot distance or the 10-foot horizontal distance. But if you would only then have an exception for just where cars are being parked at. So that could be a distinction we make in this exception to limit, and that would limit the number of snorkels that we would have to provide on these various projects. Maybe that would only affect 1 or 2 units that are directly above the garage entrance, and it wouldn't affect, all the units on the whole perimeter of the building. So
What about loading docks and places where people idle?
yeah, so again, yeah, we could use the word parking lot and not, we specifically have not used the loading dock language in this exception. So the 10-foot horizontal or the 25-foot vertical would apply to loading docks, and you would not be able to use that for this exception.
And in this day and age, on my cul-de-sac, we constantly have delivery trucks that are idling. So there's a continual supply of exhaust because of our new lifestyle of having everything delivered.
Yeah.
So that's my concern, is we're just not getting enough fresh air into buildings as it is. I understand your cost problem. I just want to make sure we're getting as clean air as possible. Is this going to apply to the MERV 13 filters we're going to talk about?
Well, again, right now the MERV 13 filter has an exception for CFM's 5. Most of these residential energy recovery ventilators are somewhere between 50 and 100 CFM. So they're very small systems. So they would currently be exempt how that proposal is written. I guess this could require, MERV 13 intake if you're taking this exception to be closer to the parking lot. That could be something we add to this.
It's not a good solution because that's only going to affect particulates, not VOCs, which when you're talking exhaust.
I mean, everybody's going to have an electric vehicle in like 8 years anyways, right? So
is that a prediction? I don't know. 8 years?
Are they just no new, is it not codified now? No new vehicles after 2030 in Washington that aren't electric?
Well, it will clean up the air if it actually happens. I guess, yeah, I hate to see it lowered, but I understand your concern.
Thanks, Nancy. Valerie.
So Eric, did you copy this from the Seattle code?
Nope, this is not a Seattle thing. This is a new.
Well, number 1 doesn't match because we don't have a separation from a street or public way. So the intake.
Okay, I guess Reed started this one. I don't know what.
Okay, so that is not the base code. And I know that's a change that wants to be made in another one, but another one, I think was Reed. Somebody else had another change and that was in there also. And also it's kind of hard. I know you put ASHRAE up there, but it's kind of hard to go through a laundry list on items when you're trying to pick something and you have a street next to a building that's going to have traffic in it, and who's to say if it's going to be high traffic area or a low traffic area. So I think it needs to be more of a general location than specifics. And I don't see anything wrong with ducting the air down to units if they need to be, but I do disagree with the 1,000 CFMs. That's kind of high. And mercantile merchants on the first floor or second floor could change, and that CFM could change depending on the occupancy. So that would be kind of problematic.
So do you have a recommended threshold you'd want
I would try to keep it closer to what a outside air for an R occupancy would be.
what if we just limited this to R occupancies only?
Oh, that's a good idea. That's usually where you're gonna find the problem.
Yeah, I mean, most of the retail spaces have a sidewalk that gets you the 10-foot horizontal. so-
Yeah, or they're set back a ways. Yeah. It is kind of hard to, the 25 feet, where do you measure it from? Do you measure it from the road? Do you measure it from the top of the car? Do you measure it from the top of the garage opening? That type of thing. That is vague.
You might want to consider going.
Yeah, it says 25 feet vertically above such location. So I've always measured from the street or from the parking vertically up. So
Yeah,
you know,
you could have a semi truck sitting there and its pipe is like already 15 feet up in the air.
right. So that's my again, go back a few code cycles, there was no vertical at all. So theoretically, you could have an outdoor intake that's, was 600 feet up in the air and it had to be 10 feet horizontally from the street. It didn't make a lot of sense. So that the 25 vertical is a good improvement in the code, but anyways.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I guess, Valerie, would you like to see streets removed and this just say parking lots only, or?
Well, you can't be, the number 2, you have to be 10 feet. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Number 2, you're 10 feet horizontally from a street. Horizontally above you. You can build within 3 feet of a street.
Yeah, this is also a problem. We had several projects in Bellevue where the residents on the alley side of the project, have to be, there really is no setback from the alley, like you're saying, it's a foot or something to the property line. And so therefore, we've had to provide these snorkels on the alley side of the project also. So.
Yeah, I think it would be better to reference residential or sleeping unit dwelling units maybe. And then you wouldn't have to specify a CFM.
Yeah, it was like.
Thanks, Valerie. Anything else, sir? I want to cut you off.
No, those were my only comments.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll also get rid of the public way. Number 1.
Yeah, I'll fix that
Okay.
with the proposal to match the model code. So. Okay, so I think probably looking for a motion to table, and then Rushing will fix this and send it back. So.
Okay, Nancy.
Unless there's other comments, yeah.
Yeah, now you've got me worried about all these apartment buildings going in along the freeways. I mean, they're problematic anyway. But the higher up you grab the fresh air, the better off it's going to be. Not that I wouldn't like to see apartment buildings not along freeways, period, but that's what's happening. And then I hadn't even thought about Bellevue. I mean, anytime you're dealing with the street, you're dealing with a lot of air pollution.
So Nancy, from your side, you'd probably want this separation from the parking lot where there's a lot less the parking stall locations.
It's not just the parking lot, it's streets traffic.
Right, streets. So if we remove streets, it would be more palatable to you.
And freeway, I mean, the higher up you pull your fresh air when you're away from these ground level, or in the case of freeways, they're not really ground level pollution sources, the better off people are going to be.
Thanks, Nancy. I guess, Eric, just one general comment that is unactionable, but I'm just curious, well, maybe it's actionable, kind of the added cost of the snorkels, just from the perspective of, it seems we have other proposals we're considering, whether it's the smoke filtration or the kitchen hood ventilation, other proposals that are adding cost to provide better air quality. And this is kind of the reverse, you know, saving dollars, maybe at a cost of air quality. So just curious for the tag to kind of consider that. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only the ductwork to go up, but then you're putting a 2-hour shaft around that duct so that you're not on the floor above. So your snorkel is separated from the floor above. So it's costing floor space in the residence above, and it's costing, you know, the cost of the shaft and such. So not really a shaft, but the separation to keep you separated from the floor above.
I guess maybe just the comment would be if there's an estimate of cost savings potentially from this exception.
They would have to have a fire damper if they ran through a residential floor to the next level. So they would have to shaft it or have a fire damper in there.
Yeah, so you're either fire damper or
Unless
an
you
enclosure to
through-
separate yourself from the
Yeah.
floor above. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing Eric wants to go do a bit more work on this one, taking into account some of the feedback from the tag. Any other thoughts or comments for him to consider? All right, hearing none, I think we're looking for our favorite kind of motion today.
I'll move to table it.
Thanks, Nancy.
I second it.
Thank you, Valerie. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. Okay, I think that moves us along to proposal number 85. Austin, talking about testing requirements for combination inlet outlets. I don't know if Austin is still.
Yep, I'm still on.
Okay, great. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So this is just trying to fix some code language to make it more enforceable. There is combination terminations that we're looking at, and we're finding it challenging to get manufacturers that don't have anything. They're always generally less than 10% when it comes to I don't know what's the wording they use, air mixing when it comes to these air combination fittings. And so it's just to allow the code to allow for these manufacturers that can go up to 10% to be able to be used. And this is just specifically laying out that kind of wording. And then I noticed there was just a spelling error or something on the Windows. And so change that. So I don't know if there's any kind of specific questions. I can dive into this a little bit more, but to me, I thought it was a bit straightforward, just helping to make it more enforceable.
Thank you, Austin. Any questions or comments for Austin on this proposal?
Yeah, you used the wrong wrong code section 2 on for number 1. There, that's not base code. The separation from the street or public way. I think adding windows is good. That adds a little bit more clarity for somebody. The 10% leakage by manufacturers. I've seen a lot of ERVs that have some pretty cheesy concentrics that go along with them that are just PVC pipes that are glued together. And they call that their factory manufactured fitting. But I do agree with this one.
Thanks, Valerie. Eric.
Austin, should the separation be to operable windows or just windows? What are we trying to achieve there?
Yeah, it's air openings, windows. So we could change it to operable windows to make it more specific.
Or operable window openings?
Yep.
Or operable window openings. And then I guess, do we want to reference the ASHRAE 62.1 section like I proposed in the other proposal here to provide a pointer to code officials for where that criteria comes from? Or
I mean, this is just matching up with the ASHRAE language, but they don't really go into it further.
Right.
I believe so. I don't see a benefit, but we could.
Okay.
Anything else, Eric? No, okay. Mike Moore.
Thank you. Sorry to be joining late. I was just at a 62.2 meeting. Caroline, were the proposal or the comments that I sent in earlier, were those have those been processed at all, or should I just start from scratch here?
So the comments you had sent, Mike, were, I think, about a different proposal.
So I sent comments on like 7 proposals, including this one. I don't know if those were addressed as those proposals were heard.
Yeah, I don't know, Krista, if you want to speak to that, how written comments on proposals get posted or whatnot.
the good news is most are tabled and we're going to talk about it again next week. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Mike, we didn't open up anything that had been emailed to Krista as a comment or thought from anyone in this conversation. This has just been public discussion of folks who were present sharing.
Gotcha.
Their
Okay.
comments.
I just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
The only one that we have taken action on is 10.
Okay, 10. And which way did that go?
That was modified. Let's see.
So I guess to keep things moving here, Mike, I think as Eric just noted, I think most proposals have been tabled today. So there's certainly an opportunity to send those comments to proponents for them to consider in addition to other of the many comments and thoughts they received today. So there's still lots of time for collaboration and improvement on any of those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the comment that I had on this one,
yeah,
I'll try to be brief, is that so 62.2 does have this requirement for the 10% separation. I took the same language from 62.2 for the approval of the combined intake exhaust termination. And I took that to the IRC and the IMC, and ultimately I got a lot of feedback from building code officials saying, hey, we don't want to do special approval of these units. And there's no recognized test method out there, standardized test method for figuring out the concentration of the gas in the intake that's, let's say, emitted by the exhaust for these units. And it was pointed out to me that the I codes right now, basically the way that they deal with combined terminations for combustion appliances is that it's basically up to the addressed within the manufacturer listing, so that if it's listed with the manufacturer, it's good to go. And I found a Natural Resources Canada reference that looked at these terminations and also interviewed various manufacturers that make these, and I wasn't able to identify any appreciable difference, like significant difference, to say that, hey, we should require, you know, special approval of these and special documentation with manufacturer data. Basically, the manufacturers like to be able to differentiate across products and say mine's better for this reason, and you should choose mine preferentially. But the manufacturers that I talked to didn't voice that in this product category. They said, hey, basically the performance, we expect it to be pretty similar across devices, and we don't see a reason to maintain this 10% requirement. And so I would just urge the committee to go with what the I codes are doing at this point, which is just you can install these without special approval and without additional requirements. And that's in the 2024 version of the IMC and the IRC.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Nancy.
Okay. Well, then now it sounds like this might get altered. My question is, and maybe you were just saying we don't know. How do we even know that it's not exceeding 10%? And why can't we get it lower? We really don't want entrainment of exhaust. Were we discussing these type of fittings back in our first set of meetings? Are these what we're talking about?
I think you're right, Nancy. I think the topic did come up when we were reviewing the 2021 codes, and this being a topic that we wanted to address in this portion of the process. Yeah, Nancy, was your question to Mike or?
I don't know whose co-proposal it is. I guess my question is 10% what people have accepted? Or can it be lower? And can you even make sure that it's not exceeding 10%?
So the 10% initially came from 62.1, where there's a requirement that with an HERV, you shouldn't have any exhaust air transfer within the case from one side of the heat exchanger to the other, basically, of 10%. And there's no, I don't believe that there's a citation to a test procedure for that, but 62.2 just picked up on that 10% reference and said, okay, for these combination termination units, let's just say the same thing, that we think it shouldn't be more than 10%. Krista just showed a IMC proposal that references a test that was done by National Resources Canada that was a tracer gas test that showed less than 10% cross-contamination for typical units. And there isn't, again, it's not a standardized test, but I'm just not aware of any products that don't achieve this, basically, and no complaints, et cetera. I was also just in a 62.2 meeting where they're talking about reducing the minimum separation distance from that traditional 10 feet to something right around 5 feet or potentially less when you're dealing with even things like kitchen exhaust from natural gas fired stoves, based on wind study data on that. And those are airstreams that aren't designed to diverge at the termination. So all the data that I'm seeing right now is pointing to this being less of a concern than it initially was thought to be when this language was put into 62.2.
Okay, now you got me concerned about them lowering it. Winds vary.
Yes, and this was a wind study test that was done at many different speeds, and it was based on the worst case scenario and maximum, very conservative assumptions, maximum concentrations, et cetera.
So this proposal is basically to add operable window openings, which is another air intake. And this last line in red, but from what you're saying, this is a given.
Right. There aren't any units that are known to perform worse than this, to my knowledge.
Okay, that's my questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Mike. Brandon, I think you're next.
I think my question sort of got answered throughout that discussion. I guess that was my question was, is there a standard for testing these devices? And I don't know if I'm looking at one of the life breath type models, and it's got a bunch of things listed on there, but I don't believe any of those are specific tests for re-entrainment of exhaust air. So we're not holding them to any sort of test standard. It's just being listed as 10%. You can do that, right? Oh yeah, we got that.
That's correct. C43918 is a standard for performance of H&ERVs.
Yep.
And it does look at exhaust air transfer ratio, but that's only like internal to the unit,
Correct,
not external to the device.
Based on pressures.
Right.
Supply the exhaust. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think we've all kind of expressed that we don't like those fittings, but it's a necessary evil, maybe.
Yeah, I would kind of just like to add that, these are being placed on, units that have less than a 10-foot, exterior wall. So it's hard to get those 10 feet clearances from adjacent apartments or, operable windows or other things. So this is kind of a fix to allow still, these ERVs to be used and to make things cost effective, while still providing good ventilation strategies with some entrainment. So this is just a fix, but a possible fix that doesn't get us 100% of the way we want, but it's better than nothing.
Well, and it's technically breathable air that you're exhausting until you exhaust your kitchen hood back into your building that we're talking about earlier. So yeah, all these things kind of play together. So it's good that we're talking about them all.
For sure.
Thanks, Brandon. Valerie.
Yeah, I just want to mention that the IMC does mention you can recirculate 10% of exhaust under 403.2.1 under recirculation of air. So it's already mentioned in the IMC on number 4. So that's already allowed, the 10% by code.
Thanks, Valerie. Eric.
Yeah, so I guess what this does do is allows designers to know about our criteria. So we've asked various manufacturers about, have you done any testing? We understand there's no testing standard for this and there's no specific, but do you meet the ASHRAE, the current ASHRAE 62.1 or 62 standard for this, for the 10%? So it does allow designers to ask the question, are you at least below this 10% threshold? It's interesting to hear. Some manufacturers have just told us, no, we don't know. Others say, yes, we've done some testing and we believe we meet the ASHRAE 62 criteria. So, we've gotten a mixed bag of answers on that so far, because we want to have some sort of comfort level when we recommend installing these. Like we said, this is air that's leaving your residence, that's coming a little bit's coming back into your residence. So typically this is for the whole house ERV. is where it's going to be used. Most of that exhaust is, yeah, coming from your bathroom, but could be coming from the kitchen if you have that connected to your whole house exhaust airstream, or you know, so yeah, it does provide some knowledge base, but yeah, we could choose just to leave it out and just rely on things to be installed for factory recommendations like we did in the 2018 code. So
No, I think you're on a good track there, Eric. Without a standard, my only comment would be we want to add a standard to this, and if there's no standard to add, then the knowledge of that being there is good.
So again, if we could add the pointer to ASHRAE 62, which tells us where this 10% criteria came from. So
Thanks, Eric. Nancy.
Okay, you just confused me a little bit more. So are you proposing taking out this sentence in red? I mean, at least having it in here gives it a little more protection, doesn't it?
correct. I would say this lets the general community and a code official know about what is an acceptable criteria. And if we were to add to this where this criteria came from, whether there's a standard to test to or not, I mean, that City of Seattle's asked me, well, is there a standard? And I'm like, nope, there's no standard. But you know, this is the criteria in ASHRAE 62. And so people don't know about what's in ASHRAE unless we provide pointers to it. So,
well, and from what Valerie said, I mean, I know I've seen the 10% in various things throughout in the codes. I've always, you know, being in public health would like it to be 0. But it is kind of the slush area, it seems, for mixing. But I wouldn't want it exceeded, that's for sure.
Thanks, Nancy. Well, Eric, is one path forward, or Austin, sorry, it sounds like some updates to the base language might need to be made just to make sure it's using Washington, not Seattle, and then possibly 2 options for the tag to consider, one that has that sentence and one that doesn't. And then the tag could consider both of those.
yeah, Krista, if you want to go grab that sentence from the 76 proposal, we could look at it. But yeah, I don't know if the tag's ready to vote on that now or not.
Yeah, and I guess I was suggesting one version. It seems like what I'm hearing is some folks want to strike the last sentence altogether, right? But potentially leave this edit about operable window openings. That could be one version, and the other version could include that sentence with or without the reference. It seems like, to be consistent with the other one, maybe the reference would be helpful.
I guess you would just have to add the words. If people want a reference to 62.2, it'd be just at the end, add in accordance with 62.2 exception 4 of section 6.8. But it sounds like from Mike's testimony that that's coming out of 62.2 in the next version, because everybody just meets this criteria. So
Yeah, definitely in process right now, but they're looking at moving from 10 feet to 5 feet. Potentially 4 feet in some cases for the minimum separation. So, you know, if you guys are looking for more options that aren't integrated units, then that 5 feet change would probably help you out there. And then of course the integrated, yeah, we'll see if we pull out that 10% reference.
Okay, I guess Austin is the proponent on this one. Do you have any other thoughts on where you want to take it?
Yeah, I'm fine with putting that ASHRAE in there. I think if it gets taken out, then I don't really see a benefit of having this change at all, but I like what I see on the screen right now, so that's fine.
Okay. And Valerie had made a comment about the base language. Is that something that we still need to just double check?
It's the base language has to do with item 1. That sentence should be there. So
Okay, that was the only change.
Yeah, that was the only thing I saw that needed to come out.
Okay, thanks. Well, we can, if folks are ready, could certainly vote on this one right now as is, or if tag members want to suggest other modifications, we'll leave it up to the group on what you want to do with this one. Yeah, I guess just to recap, it seems like the choices would be to approve it as shown on the screen. There's an option, obviously, to reject it entirely, or I think part of what we were hearing was to potentially strike that whole last sentence of the exception and have that as a different version that the tag could recommend.
I'll move approval of this one as written to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Nancy. Is there a second for that?
Here, I'll second that.
Okay, Jonathan seconds it. Any further discussion?
So we're talking about the first, both those edits shown up above number 1, or I guess struck out number 1, and down below the exception.
We are right now voting on approving what is shown on the screen.
Okay, got it.
just to be clear on item 1, it's not part of the code. That's part of the Seattle code that shouldn't have been part of the code proposal. So
oh, gotcha.
it'd just really be erased.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Any further discussion? Mike.
I want to say operable fenestration instead of window openings, just to cover, doors, windows, that kind of stuff, or is the desire just to address window openings there?
Yeah, I guess the broader term would be operable openings.
I'll accept that for my proposal if that's necessary.
Thank you, Nancy. Jonathan is as the second. Is that modification acceptable to you?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Your typo correction, Austin, turned into a major change.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Don't see anyone's hand up, so we will go ahead and vote on this. We'll try a voice vote first. All those in favor, say aye.
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 I think I heard Nancy and Brandon in favor. Sorry, was anybody else who said aye?
Yeah.
Sorry, was that you, Valerie?
Yeah, I said aye.
Okay. All those opposed, say nay. All right. Did everybody vote? I don't think I heard from Jonathan or Andrea. Are you guys abstaining?
Yeah, I stepped away, so I wasn't like super up to date on everything. So I'm gonna abstain for this one.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. And Jonathan?
Yeah, the same here. I was just gonna diverge to the group wisdom.
Okay. I think we had 3 yays. Is that right, Krista?
I think so. For some reason I was hearing 4, but we don't have 4 members that were there besides Andrea and Jonathan.
Okay, should we do a roll call on that one just to make sure?
We can if you wish.
I think it's clear as long as everybody's good with what I think it passed with three A's, Nancy, Brandon, Valerie, and then we had 2 abstentions, I think is what I had heard there. Great. I think we made it through almost all of them that we had of the ones we hadn't yet discussed. I think the only one we didn't make it through was Valerie's, which is just a kind of a typo correction one. So that one should be pretty straightforward, actually. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think this one even needs to go in front of the tag.
Okay. Great. Well, that means that next week we will be only revisiting everything. So everything we talk about next week, we will have already discussed once. So for proponents who are returning with modified versions, it would be really helpful if you could just kind of be prepared to maybe highlight some of the concerns that were raised in the first discussion and kind of highlight how you addressed those in your revised version, just so we can kind of stay on task. Any closing thoughts or comments before we head off for the day? No? Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's time and valuable expertise. And we will see you all again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.